Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra. Sam Getzinger makes his debut with us on this Wednesday. We'll get you ready for the Bison and Illinois State. First time that NDSU's traveled to normal since 2021. A 20-0 win that day for North Dakota State. As we'll get to the Redbirds in just a little bit. Obviously, Tim Polasek had his press conference yesterday, which we'll hear a couple snippets from that, especially considering the Bison defense. But non-conference is over. Valley play is here, which always I have dubbed the gauntlet. But we talked about this, Sam, in the preseason when you looked at the schedule. The first 4 games, this is the heavy hitters. It starts with this with Illinois State, and we'll get to UND and all that next week. But the first 4 games of conference play, there is nothing to mess around with here for the Bison.
No, absolutely not. This is the biggest stretch of the season that's coming up. And, you know, conference play, I would say it went fairly well. Had your ups, you had your downs, you learned a little bit more. But this is a big test. It starts this week with Illinois State, and then it progressively gets harder as we go on, and we kind of wrap up this, 4-game stretch, South Dakota State at the end.
Yep.
And then, not to downplay any opponent, but it gets a little easier towards the back half there. But this is going to be a true test to see what they're made of. And as Coach Polasek has said, it's 1-game season, so you're out.
Yeah, the intriguing part to me is just when we went into the season knowing only 3 quarterbacks were coming back in the Valley, still was hard to judge who was going to be good.
Yeah.
And I still think we're there. There are some teams I thought Youngstown would be better. I thought Mo State would struggle. They've been really good. Illinois State's in that boat, and we'll get to more on them in a minute. But it's still it's hard to wrap my mind around or my arms around some of these teams that I thought would be better and haven't, if that makes sense.
Well, and then on the flip side, you have UND, who you weren't sure about.
Correct.
And now they're pretty
Correct.
good,
They've been
pretty
really
solid.
well.
They're going to make a run towards the end of the season. And like you said, we'll touch on it. But Illinois State, good record, couple of, high-scoring wins and stuff like that. But their FCS opponents haven't been that impressive. So I think we're going to find out a lot more starting this week. And then we'll figure it out from there.
On the Bison side of things, injury-wise, Tyler Terhark, Raja Nelson, wide receivers will not play. Another senior wide receiver, Braylon Henderson, his status up in the air, potential that he get out there. But wide receiver, that's a spot I had a big question mark. They have answered that in spades. The young Bison wide receivers have been dynamite.
Well, and I was thinking about this last night. Think about where this team would be if those guys were here. Raja, Braylon, Tyler's made a couple of big plays throughout the season. But even on the defensive side of the ball, if Cole was there, even if Hunter was still around too, it would just be such a different look. And they're already good, which is very promising. And the young guys have stepped up. Jackson Williams, John Gores here and there, Chris Harris, Makai Collins. It's been fun to watch offensively, defensively. Still looking for some more answers.
Yeah, one thing before we get to the defense, offensive line was the other one. You have not, and Polasek mentioned this, you have not noticed Gray Zabel at all, which is a reason why he's being touted as the next NFL draft pick out of North Dakota State. But that's a spot where we talked about ad nauseum from March to the start of the season. They've been great.
Absolutely.
They've been really good.
And Griffin MP, haven't heard a lot from
No.
him. And I always go back to the center. Obviously, number one job is to get the ball to the quarterback. There hasn't been a bad snap really all season, which has been a big plus for Trent Fraley. Jake Rock's been in the mix in there too. Obviously, you have Miller and Zabel, who have just been studs. Zabel really showing why he's an NFL prospect right now. But they've been quiet, and that's the best sign for an offensive line that you could ask for.
Defensively is where we're going to hit. We've been talking about it all the week. The Bison allowed 200 rushing yards for the second straight week. Now, I'll throw this at you here because we haven't talked about this yet. Towson had 130, 120 some odd rushing yards prior to this run by Terrell Green that went for 72 yards and the touchdown, which obviously put it over 200 yards.
Right.
So I guess if you want to go glass half full guy, Bison rush defense had looked pretty good.
Absolutely.
They had 3 and outs to start the second half, then gave up the 2 drives, so that was really good, and had a pick, and then gave up the 2. So it's a real mixed bag on that.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to judge, and you saw it on that video. If Kopp or Jones makes that tackle, at the second level, they don't have that 200 yards rushing, and it's a completely different conversation right now with this defense. But they won the turnover battle. That's always a win in my book with the Marcus Shepard interception. didn't give up a third down conversion in the first half. And it all goes back to what Coach Polasek has been saying for the last couple of weeks, need to play a full 4 quarters. Yeah. And we haven't really seen that in the first 4 games of the season. So something needs to change as we get into Valley play. But I would say 65-75% of the game, defense looked pretty solid, and then there was just a couple of things that put the numbers over the top.
And that's the hard part to take out of it. If you want to be glass half full and say, okay, they had 3 3-and-outs and a pick, really, really good.
Yeah.
Then they had 2 other drives where Illinois State went down the field and scored, and Polasek took onus on that because it was the 15-yard personal foul he got for being too close on the sideline.
Sideline infraction.
And the sideline infraction. And then obviously the really bad one was the Green touchdown run. That's the negative part. So it's everyone, you're always going to flock to that. We do that. Yep. It's only natural considering there's been 2 long touchdown runs in the last 2 games. So I think it's a mix somewhere in the middle, Sam, of where they're at defensively. I think there are moments of it, but there's not enough. There's still not enough guys that are popping, that are making plays, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And looking at the numbers, 4 sacks on the season. We've been talking about the defensive line. Would love to see them get home a little bit more. Obviously, some blocking schemes from other teams throughout the season have made that a little bit more complicated. Does it go back to getting different faces or moving different players to different spots? That's a decision that they'll make, and they've done that a couple of times throughout the season. But you're exactly right. There's been flashes. They've been impressive at times. Need to sustain that and find what works best.
You're a TV pro. That's a good segue because I asked Tim Polasek, because that's the other thing that people have been tweeting at me and wondering about, well, are their younger guys going to play? Polasek said to us 2 weeks ago, I want to see more guys playing. I asked him that question yesterday at the press conference.
I appreciate you asking because we were on that track. And then they get into a 2-minute mode, okay? And then some of our older guys, with what my message was last week, some of the older guys are flat better at zone coverages and making checks and getting us lined up when it comes to prevent and 2-minute defense. But I thought, the combination of Gully and Enoch was out there, right? The combination of Sam Young playing strong safety and Darius, Givens at free. They're all tied together. Our Sam backer and our strong safety are very similar in how they fit and what they have to fit. And that's been that way. That's why Colton could go play nickel. Colton Hegel went from strong safety to nickel, and that was a fascinating package for us. But yes, I'm up there right now, doing everything I can outside of making the decisions to encourage playing guys and playing more people, like whether it's up front or it's, at the linebacker position. I think, you get through the preseason, now you're in Missouri Valley. I don't want to say we are who we are because I will make some decisions if needed. But it's going to be hard to get signal callers adjusted at times. But I really like the idea of Kubas being out there at Sam. That was another package. So, it's just some of the situational things that popped up limited those opportunities to see him.
A couple things to take out of that. I don't think he's going to hesitate if he needs to go in, and he said it, to maybe slam his hand on the table, say we need to play X instead of Y. He's saying it would be difficult because I'm assuming that either Wirtz or Kubitz are the guys making the calls defensively, both 6-year guys at the linebacker spot, that if you were to change that, there could be some either confusion or could lead to some misplays. But at this point, I guess the question is, he said some guys are just flat out better at making calls, and that's why they're probably playing. But he also said it's not who we are. I think I don't know if he's heard what we're talking about, that if he's going to make changes, they're going to do that. We saw it during the game. You saw it as well in the second half against Towson, that Sibamana was out there with Gully and Kubitz. That was a new lineup combo at linebacker that they tested out there.
Well, and I would say, too, that Gully, he didn't do a ton in the Towson game, but he's been one of the better linebackers on this team throughout non-conference play. The best defensive performance of the season so far has been the Tennessee State game.
Right.
And in that game, there was a lot of young faces that proved that they can play. Obviously, you want your older veterans out there making the calls. Does it take a couple of games to find those solidified? Do you get Gully?
And do you want to do that in Valley play?
Exactly.
That's the rub of that.
That's especially in this stretch of Valley
play
too, which is not easy.
And I'll caution that Tennessee State opponent, they overmatched. That's so you have to take that into account for maybe why those guys were making such flashing plays. But at one point, you've got to say, all right, what do we have?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Personally, I thought that would have happened maybe but the game against ETSU didn't play out that way. They needed their guys out there, and the way the Towson game played out, I thought at one point it's 24-3 or 31-10.
Yeah. If they
That
would
might
have
be
kept
the
up the
opportunity to do
momentum from
that.
the first half
Right.
into the second half, which they did at the
Right.
Shepherd interception, but as we got later in the third quarter into
Yeah.
the fourth as well, then, yeah, maybe you
Right.
get some different combinations in there. But the game, like you said, just haven't really played out that way.
We'll break. We come back here on the BMZ. We'll get our download of Illinois State. Brock Spack's Redbirds come in trying to snap a 12-game losing skid to the Bison. Much more on the BMZ on this Wednesday morning. We're back right after this. Back on the BMZ, Illinois State has a mark of 3-1 on the season. They beat Eastern Illinois this past Saturday. In fact, the 3 wins that they have come over teams that have a combined 1 win so far this season. North Alabama is winless. Western Illinois hasn't won a game in 2.5 years. And Eastern Illinois has won 1 football game. The 1 loss, Illinois State was shut out at Iowa. So I guess my question to you is, how good is this team?
Exactly. We're going to find out. But what do these scores tell you here against the winless teams? North Alabama, a 24-17 win.
That's too close.
That's
No,
not great.
no.
Give up 34 points to Western
They
Illinois.
were down at halftime in that game to
Exactly. So
Western. Yeah.
What?
That's not good either.
And the outlier is the Iowa game at
Right.
the beginning of the season. Big Ten team. Of course, it's Iowa, but then again, in the same conversation, it's Iowa. You
But
give
they
up
weren't
40
competitive in that game,
Yeah.
Sam. I think a lot of us, when we were picking that game, like, all right, Iowa's going to win, but I'd like to see Illinois State normally shows, well, I mean, it was what, 40 rip?
Yeah.
The game wasn't even close.
Yeah, just shut down
Yeah.
defensively. So what kind of team are we going to get here? When you look at the numbers between Illinois State and North Dakota State, in my opinion, they look fairly similar. This offensive line for Illinois State, they're big.
They're monsters.
Just
Yeah.
like Towson brought to the table, and look how well that worked out for them with their 200 yards rushing. So what team are we going to get? Who knows? They got them at 15 right now in the FCS polls, but this is going to be intriguing. This is their best test FCS play on paper that we'll see so far this season.
They have struggled scoring against NDSU, especially at home. They got shut out in 2021. 2019, they got blown out. I think they scored 7 in that game. 2017, in a snowstorm, they got 7 in that one. So they have barely been able to score against the Bison at their own place.
Yep.
But granted, we talked about the issues that the Bison defense have had. They are also coming in shorthanded. 2 of their best players are hurt. Amir Abdullah, their outstanding linebacker, got hurt against Iowa. His status still up in the air for this game. They will not have Mason King, who was the Missouri Valley All running back, who got hurt literally on his first carry of the season on this play against Iowa, tore his ACL there, and he's out. That's a major blow because he is a tremendous running back.
But let's not forget who they have backing him up, in Wenkers Wright,
Yep.
who is all-name candidate, by the way. But he's putting up 150-plus yard games. He averages about 111. He's no slouch, and he's a big running back, too, which is something that North Dakota State just hasn't really seen this season. They've seen the shorter, smaller, shiftier guys.
Right.
So it's not
He's
like,
a bowling ball,
yeah,
man. He's a big dude.
It's not like they completely have nothing after King. They have a dude back there.
Yeah.
Who we'll see how this run defense does against him.
Defensively, that's the question mark for the guys. They had 2 players last year. The Bison didn't see Illinois State last year. There were all Valley selections, got individual awards, each of them banged up. I'll be intrigued to see how they play, if
Yeah.
they can play in this game coming up on Saturday. That's part of a opening weekend of Valley play. There are a couple teams that have byes. Northern Iowa's not playing this weekend, nor is South Dakota State. The Jackrabbits will open up Valley play next week. But the Valley openers, we talk about the Bison. Illinois State is a heck of a way to start. So is the game in Vermillion on Saturday. Southern Illinois plays at South Dakota. That's not creeping into Valley play. That is a
That's right.
2
in the
by
fire
4
there,
across
yeah.
the head to start.
That's right in the fire. That's going to be one of the games of the weekend right there. So keep an eye out on that one. South Dakota's been, pretty solid, picking up right where they left off last year. Southern Illinois, they're coming off of a loss, aren't they?
They are.
So
They lost to SEMO at home last
Yeah,
week.
they got something to prove there in that one. So that's going to be intriguing to keep your eye out on that one. And besides that, the Youngstown, Missouri State, that's turning into be a decent game. UND, Murray State. I mean, UND should roll in that one, shouldn't they?
Well, the intriguing part, two things. I'll go back to that Youngstown-Mo State game. Those are two teams I had picked the opposite way for preseason. I had Youngstown as a playoff team. I thought they were going to be pretty good. They're 1-3 and just gave up 73 points to Pitt, and they lost to Duquesne the week before that. Mo State, we know this is it for them in FCS. They're moving to the Conference USA and FBS next season. I thought, well, probably 3 or 4 wins. They've overachieved. They're 2-2, but they've played really well. They should have beaten Montana. They gave Ball State a heck of a run. They could legitimately say we could be 3-1. So each of those teams have flipped this year. As for UND and Murray State, you're right. UND should handle them. Murray's still the great unknown. They have 50-some-odd new guys on that team. They completely rebuilt their roster with Jody Wright as head coach. So UND had a slow start with San Diego. They cannot have a slow start with Murray. Murray's more talented than San Diego. That would be trouble for them if they fall behind like they did against San Diego last week.
And I'm curious to see how UND is going to keep this momentum up and how long they can do it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's 4 straight home games.
They came out flying out of the gates.
Correct.
You know, and how long can you do that? But you're right. You're being in home, and they're still in North Dakota later on.
Right.
This week
They don't
too,
leave. They don't leave
what
the
a
state
luxury.
for 7 weeks, which is outrageous because they have 4 straight home games. And sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you like to change it up.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a couple at home, then get out on the road where, you know, the Bison have been flip-flopping every week where they've had a game at home, a game on the road. UND hasn't had that a month since they went to Ames.
I wonder if that's going to be a shock at the end of the season when now they have to get used to the travel schedule and stuff like that. So.
They will go to normal, too. They'll be at Illinois State to wrap up the season. The other game is a non-conference one between Houston Christian and Indiana State. See if the Sycamores can get their second win. Indiana State and Murray are coming off bye weeks last week. That SIU-USD game is really interesting because you look at South Dakota has yet to play really a, quote, comparable FCS team. They beat Drake last week, who's a non-scholarship team. The Portland State game didn't happen.
Canceled, yep.
SIU will be tougher than they think. If they had DJ Williams, I'd be more inclined to pick Southern Illinois maybe to win that football game because they play well. SIU and USD have played 2 barn burners each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I kind of didn't realize that South Dakota State just hasn't really had the strength of schedule to this point. I mean, they look good, but had a game canceled. Played against Wisconsin. You played against a Division II Northern State. So this is their first test of the season. And SIU, you come off of a loss, they got something to prove.
Don't forget, we'll be with you for Bison Game Day live on Saturday morning, 10 a.m. from Normal, Illinois, in Hancock Stadium with Sam, myself, Kyle, and Jeff Kolpak. Then the game coverage begins at 1:50 with our kickoff show, and then the game begins slightly after 2. Looks like overcast. Hopefully no rain for the Bison and the Birds. We thank Sam for stopping by. You can catch us next week on the Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra.